White blood cells or leukocytes are the fewest of the formed elements. That makes up around 0.1% of formed elements. Leukocytes are also termed as white blood cells, WBCs. As word, leuko is derived from Greek word leukos, means white. These leukocytes are the colorless formed elements and are the mobile units of the body's protective system that aids in defense of the body by protecting the body against bacteria, viruses, parasites, cancer cells, and toxins. Normally, there are 5,000 to 10,000 WBCs in a microliter of human blood. This is called a white blood cell count. White blood cell counts are of interest to determine patients' clinical conditions, as bacterial infections usually cause neutrophil counts to increase, whereas certain parasitic infections cause the number of eosinophils to increase. There are different types of white blood cells, or we can say leukocytes generally can be divided into two categories. Granulocytes, these are the leukocytes with granular cytoplasm, and agranulocytes. These are leukocytes without granules or with clear cytoplasm. Most granulocytes include eosinophils, basophils, and neutrophils, and these all are about 2 times as large as RBCs. While agranulocytes include lymphocytes and monocytes, which lack visible cytoplasmic granules. Let's individually look at all these granulocytes and agranulocytes one by one. Starting with granulocytes, where first granulocytes are neutrophils. Neutrophils are the most abundant granulocytes that makes up 50 to 70% of the leukocytes in most adults. Neutrophils, which are also known as polymorphs, have fine or small granules in the cytoplasm. Nucleus is multilobed, with no lobes in younger cells and 2 to 5 lobes in older neutrophils. Diameter of neutrophils is 10 to 12 micrometer. Neutrophils are highly mobile, and because of this, they are usually the first type of WBCs to arrive at an injury site. Also, they are very active cells in attacking and digesting bacteria. Thus, an acute bacterial infection causes the number of neutrophils to greatly increase. This animation will help you understand the role of neutrophils. Neutrophils have the ability to cross the endothelial barrier of blood vessels by squeezing between the intraendothelial spaces. Such movement of neutrophils by squeezing through the narrow path is called diapedesis. These neutrophils are then attracted towards the site of infection by following certain chemokines, by a process called chemotaxis. Following chemotaxis, neutrophils reach the area of infection. There they destroy the invader by the process of phagocytosis. That is the engulfment and then digestion of microbe inside the cell. Or these neutrophils use an additional method for killing of invaders. That is called nets, or neutrophil extracellular traps. Neutrophil extracellular traps, nets, are net-like structures, just like spiders' webs that attack the invader. These nets are composed of DNA histone complexes and proteins released by activated neutrophils. These nets can capture the large-size invaders that can't be engulfed by phagocytosis, and ultimately cause killing of that invader. Now the next granulocytes are eosinophils. Eosinophils make up only 2 to 4% of circulating leukocytes. Eosinophils have coarse, larger granules in the cytoplasm. Nucleus is bilobed and spectacle-shaped, and the diameter of the cell varies between 10 to 14 micrometer. These eosinophils play an important role in defense against parasites and allergic diseases like asthma. As during parasitic infections, there is a production of a large number of eosinophils which move towards the affected tissues. Eosinophils are not phagocytic like neutrophils, so they attack invading parasites by some special type of cytotoxic substances present in their granules. When released over the invading parasites from the granules, these substances become lethal and destroy the parasites. Eosinophils are particularly effective against multicellular parasites, such as parasitic flukes, including flatworms and tapeworms, and roundworms, including hookworms, and pinworms, which are too big to engulf. Next granulocytes are basophils, which are similar to neutrophils or eosinophils. However, they are more irregular. Basophils usually account for less than 1% of circulating leukocytes. The cytoplasm of basophils holds histamine-containing granules that are large and coarse, that also have coarse granules in the cytoplasm. Nucleus is bilobed, usually U or S-shaped, and the diameter of the cell is 8 to 10 micrometer. As for their function, they migrate to sites of injury and cross the capillary endothelium to accumulate in the damaged tissues, where they release the inflammatory chemical histamine, which dilates blood vessels. Histamine also attracts other WBCs to areas of inflammation. Other than this, basophils also release heparin, a compound that prevents blood clotting. Stimulated basophils release these chemicals into the interstitial fluids, and thus, these chemicals enhance the local inflammation as initiated by mast cells. So basophils works in close resemblance with mast cells. This was all about granulocytes. Now let's move to agranulocytes. That includes monocytes and lymphocytes. Let's see what are monocytes. Monocytes are agranulocytes that are the largest type of blood cells, up to 3 times as large as RBCs. Their average diameter is 8 to 10 micrometers. They have nuclei that may be either kidney-shaped, lobed, oval, or round. Their cytoplasm is abundant and pale blue in color, whereas their U-shaped or kidney-shaped nuclei stain dark purple. Monocytes usually make up 3% to 8% of circulating leukocytes and live for either weeks or months. A single monocyte remains in the circulation for only about 24 hours before it enters the peripheral tissues. There it becomes a tissue macrophage. Macrophages are aggressive phagocytes that are very important in the defense against viruses, chronic infections such as tuberculosis, and certain intracellular bacterial parasites. They also release chemicals that attract and stimulate neutrophils, monocytes, and other phagocytic cells. This was about monocytes and macrophages. Now, the other agranulocytes are the lymphocytes. Like monocytes, the lymphocytes also do not have granules in the cytoplasm. Nucleus is oval, bean-shaped, or kidney-shaped. Lymphocytes make up between 20% and 30% of circulating leukocytes. That makes them the second most abundant leukocytes in the blood, after neutrophils. Circulating lymphocytes represent a very small fraction of all lymphocytes. At any particular moment, most of the body's lymphocytes are in other connective tissues and organs of the lymphatic system. The circulating blood contains 3 functional classes of lymphocytes: B lymphocytes, T lymphocytes, and natural killer cells. P cells or B lymphocytes represent 10% to 15% of peripheral lymphocytes in blood. They undergo maturation in bone marrow and peripheral lymphoid tissue, and are mainly responsible for humoral immunity, which is a specific defense mechanism that involves the production of antibodies. In the presence of foreign invader, when B cells interact with its antigen in the presence of T cells and macrophages, B cells can transform into plasma cells, which abundantly make and secrete antibodies that are directed against specific antigens. That binds and directly or indirectly kills the pathogen. In this way, these cells are responsible for humoral immunity. Next comes T cells or T lymphocytes represent 70% to 80% of peripheral lymphocytes in blood. They undergo maturation primarily in the thymus, hence named T cells. In the thymus, T cells multiply and differentiate into helper T cells, cytotoxic T cells, regulatory T cells, or become memory T cells. There, helper T cells assist other white blood cells in immunologic processes. Cytotoxic T cells destroy infected cells and tumor cells by release of perforins and granzymes that induce apoptotic pathway. Regulatory T cells actively suppress activation of immune system and prevent autoimmune reactions. And memory T cells stay inside the body and acts as memory for the future infection. Now the last lymphocytes are natural killer cells. Natural killer cells also belong to the family of lymphocytes, as they are derived from common progenitor as that of T and B lymphocytes, but they are mainly involved in innate immune system, as they quickly respond to wide variety of pathological reactions by detecting and destroying infected cells. This was all about the second formed element of blood, that are leukocytes, where we discussed about granulocytes that are basophils, neutrophils, and eosinophils. And then we discussed about agranulocytes that are monocytes and lymphocytes. With that, we are done with two formed elements of blood, that are erythrocytes and white blood cells. Now the third and the last formed elements are thrombocytes or platelets. Platelets, also called thrombocytes, are the second most abundant of the formed elements, with each microliter of blood containing between 150,000 and 400,000 platelets. Instead of being individual cells, platelets are actually fragments of larger bone marrow cells. These cells are its progenitor bone marrow cells, called megakaryocytes. The edges of the megakaryocyte break off to form cell fragments called platelets. Platelets are small, colorless, non-nucleated cytoplasmic bodies that are approximately 1/4 of the size of a lymphocyte. In actual size, platelets measure between 2 to 4 micrometer in diameter. Normally, platelets are of several shapes, like spherical or rod-shaped, and become oval or disc-shaped when inactivated. Inactivated platelets are without processes or philopodia, but during activation, the platelets change their shape with the elongation of long filamentous pseudopodia, which are called processes or philopodia. Philopodia help the platelets move and aggregate together. But approximately 1/3 of the body's platelets are held in the spleen and other vascular organs instead of in the bloodstream. These reserves are mobilized during a circulatory crisis, such as severe bleeding. The function of platelets is primarily to block injuries to damaged blood vessels and to start forming blood clots. Let's have a look at some major functions of platelets. Normally, platelets are inactive and execute their actions only when activated. Activated platelets immediately release many substances. Functions of platelets are carried out by these substances. First role of platelets is in blood clotting. Platelets are responsible for the formation of intrinsic prothrombin activator. Prothrombin activator catalyzes the conversion of prothrombin into thrombin. This thrombin is the last enzyme in coagulation cascade that converts fibrinogen into fibrin and thus helps in making fibrin clot. Second role of platelet is in clot retraction. In the blood clot, blood cells, including platelets, are entrapped in between the fibrin threads. Cytoplasm of platelets contains the contractile proteins, namely actin, myosin, and thrombocinin, which are responsible for clot retraction, so that excessive clot gets removed and thus prevent disruption in blood flow. Third role is in repair of ruptured blood vessels. Platelet-derived growth factor, PDGF, formed in cyto. Plasma of platelets is useful for the repair of the endothelium and other structures of the ruptured blood vessels. Another role of platelets is in defense mechanism. We know that filopodia enables platelets to agglutinate. By the property of agglutination, platelets encircle the foreign bodies and destroy them. Platelets can undergo phagocytosis of microbes as well, thus known as mild phagocytes. Now the last and the major role of platelets is in hemostasis. That is the processes of the prevention of blood loss or stoppage of bleeding. Platelets accelerate the hemostasis by 3 ways. First, platelets secrete 5-hydroxytryptophan, or 5-HT, which causes the constriction of blood vessels. Second, due to the adhesive property of platelets, they seal the damage in blood vessels, like capillaries. And third, by formation of temporary plug, that is further strengthened by fibrin, the platelets seal the damage in blood vessels. This was all about the third formed element, that are platelets. So this was a detailed video about blood, in which we covered all aspects related to blood, including its functions. Components of blood. Genesis and detailed physiology of those components. This video must have improved your knowledge. And if you want to get more, keep watching sqadia.com.